we're exploring some terrain tactica. And in this vlog, I want to look at elevation, because this is kind of an interesting place. This idea, we've got these wargaming rules, and they're trying to do something with the narrative. They're trying to provide a simulation of sorts. When we have terrain, we're going to model it up. We're going to make it look good. It's going to build the narrative. It's going to be a theme. This idea of with the terrain and the table and your miniatures, you step back, you're really looking at something awesome. It's almost like we're in that moment. It's almost like we're playing a role-playing game. But layered over this, and of course, the complexity, we're looking at kind of an overall system so you can identify it in your own wargaming system. When we explore this idea of terrain, it's going to give you some sort of advantage. It's going to take the unit that's occupying that piece of terrain and increase or magnify its staying power, its type of attacks, its presence on the table. It's an advantage. So what you'll see is terrain can be very, very important. Let's look at elevation. This idea of when you make a shooting attack, a ranged attack, a magic attack, terrain is important because you might be blocking line of sight. If you're playing a system that has levels or layers of terrain, even if it's WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, blocks line of sight, you can't shoot. But if I'm elevated and I have a unit in that elevation, then depending on the level of elevation, I might be able to see the entire battlefield. And if I've got some missile launchers, if I've got some plasma casters, if I've got some sort of long range type unit up in there, then essentially I have access to the entire table. And what do you have to shoot back with me, against me? So terrain can be very, very important. Elevation, very important. Depends on the size of the table. The bigger the table, the more important it is. The smaller the table, and this is relative depending on the system, the smaller the table is, elevation becomes a death trap. Elevation becomes, you might as well just toss that unit away. So we talk about units on the table, and a unit has a shooting-based attack, a ranged-based attack, this idea of a threat bubble that it projects out. And we jumped into threat bubbles. I've pushed that up to the Wargaming Tactics playlist here, but I need to framework it a little bit for those of you jumping in new to this series. This idea, let's say I have a unit that can shoot 24 inches out, right? It's got rapid fire guns, 24 inches out, machine gun, 24 inches out. I essentially, the firing arc, if it's 360 or a certain angle, I trace out, extend the ruler 24 inches, and that's what I can hit. So what you see is if you are on a smaller gaming table, maybe a little bit bigger than skirmish, mid-size down to skirmish, if you have a unit that's elevated, yes, that unit can see me. But all of my units, most of my units can see it, and the table's small enough that my long range and my medium range ranged attacks are going to be able to hit you. So a perfect example is Chain of Command, World War II. The ranges are extremely long. Almost infinite on the table to represent modern weapons and modern tactics. So if I take a machine gun team and put them on the top of a hill, yes, you're going to get cover. Yes, they're going to be able to see the entire table. That one machine gun team can put out 8 to 16 D6 to shoot. And just to framework it, Chain of Command, late war, World War II, if I've got a machine gun team, it's going to roll, if it's a heavy machine gun, between 8 and 16 dice. I'm going to need 4s or higher to hit you. And then if you're not in cover, 4 and 5, 4 is shock, meaning the unit takes shock because it's getting shot at, trying to go to the ground, trying to get cover. 5 and 6 is a kill. You remove a miniature. Then we have to see if a junior officer or a senior officer attached to it gets hit. Well, that seems pretty good. But if I'm up there on that ridge and I can see you and we have infinite range, all your rifle teams, we're not even talking about like your Sherman tank coming up the road, that has access, that can see it, switch to high explosive, light me up. Likewise, every single rifle team on the table, if you can draw a line of sight, you can shoot at me. So my one unit is going to put, depending on the machine gun team, 8 to 16 dice. But you're going to be like, okay, Fritz, here's 10 dice. Here's 10 dice. Here's 10 dice. Here's the Sherman 8 dice, high explosive round. Here's another 6 for the machine gun on top. Here's another 6 for the ball machine gun. And you're just going to blast me away. So that's because of the range. Elevation, where elevation does work, is if the table is so big. If the table is so big and essentially you have infinite range, you don't have infinite range. If the table's so big, you don't have infinite range. If I can get up there and push my range out, but you can't connect with me, that is absolutely where it's worth. Unless you have some outliers where I have some sort of unit, if we're talking about chain of command, once you get to the late war, Tiger tanks and above, the armor is so incredible, unless you're hitting it rear armor or at really close range with some sort of anti-tank weapon, it's pretty much as invulnerable as it's going to be. If I park something like that most weapons in the game, with it being squad and skirmish based, are not going to be able to touch this tank, that's a different story. So survivability combined with range and other abilities, possibly. Now, if it's a long-range table, going back in the day, I had a chance to play in a massive Warhammer 40,000 event. This was a mega battle, probably like 30 players on each side. I was playing my Eldar. Think about space elves in space with space magic. And I had a team of Pathfinders. These are like snipers. And I attached a Farseer. That's like a space elf mage that lets you get rerolls to hit, rerolls to wound, and do all these like psychic powers and stuff. And I spent the morning, there was a giant, the gaming table was huge, multiple tables, ruined vehicles, ruined terrain. And in the center of the table was this giant like mountain and this little like fortress on top. I spent real time, like 4 or 5 hours. I mean, I was playing the rest of my forces, but 4 or 5 hours, the morning, just till the lunch break, moving this Pathfinder Ranger team with the Farseer up the table so I could get those snipers at that elevation. And once I was there, I was able to shoot at everything and anything that I could because I had massive range, but not everyone had range back. So from that point of view, yes. Now, if we were playing a more regular game of Warhammer 40,000 on a standard gaming table, I would avoid that because, I'm going to get rerolls. I'm going to get Space Elf magic. I'm going to shoot at you and cause some kills, but you're going to blast absolutely everything off the table. So when we look at elevation, yes, there are times where it has extreme value, but you won't want to fall into the trap of taking a valuable unit that has long range, parking it up there, and then have it just be shot at by everything on the table because the limitations of the rules are essentially range-based and maybe like cover save-based. At that point, you'll get your free shot off, but then everything on the table is going to blast you. But if it's a bigger table, then there is more opportunity. Approach elevation, while it is important, approach elevation with caution. I've seen more players, myself included, taking heavy weapon teams, parking up there, these visions of glory where I'm just going to like light up everyone on the table with multiple heavy bolters, and then you get torrented off the table and you're like, sad face. Elevation can sometimes, depending on the circumstances, be a definite death trap.